there everyone, my name is Andrew, and this is Canadian Starships. Welcome back to update number 14 on the 1000 scale Enterprise D project. This is the pre-paint update, which means we're going to be doing absolutely everything necessary to prepare the ship for its beauty paint. So first thing we're going to need to do is all of the obvious putty work around the ship, and there is a lot of it. The entire saucer rim is going to need putty work. The area where the saucer joins the neck, the area where the neck joins the secondary hull, where the two halves of the secondary hull meet, the area that the pylons are joined to, where the pylons and the nacelles join, and there is even work to do on the nacelles, including some clear filler work on the chiller grills. So all of that obvious work needs to be done. Then we're going to go through and do all of the masking for paint. So all of the windows have to be masked, the deflector dish, the Bussard collectors, chiller grills, all of those things need to be masked, and we're gonna have to create some masks. I don't think that the mask set I have from Lou covers absolutely everything, and we have a little bit of a different approach on how we would look at doing the windows, so I might need to do some window masks as well, just so that they are sized to my personal preference. Then, once all of that's done, we're going to be doing the adhesion promoter coats. We're going to be doing the primer coats, and that's going to reveal all of the additional filler putty work that's going to have to happen. The gray primer reveals all of the defects in the kit, which will require some work. So that is what we are going to do in this update. Let's get right at it. But before we get started, why not take a moment and click the subscribe button? And while you're here, click on that notification bell so you don't miss a single video. So I thought I'd show you what I'm doing to fill the edges of the saucer. Now, the two parts of the saucer have an awful lot of extra material when they arrive, and so you may remember in the first update where I was using the belt sander to get rid of all that material. Now, the belt sander is the best to try to keep it as even as possible, but it's impossible to get it even all the way across the saucer. So when you put the two halves of the saucer together, you do get gaps. And so I'm taking some two-part epoxy sculpt, and I've made little strands of it, and I'm just forcing it into the gaps with a toothpick. Then I take my metal sculpting tool, and with the flatter end of it, I push the putty into the gap, and in the process, smooth it out and remove any of the excess material. Now, this requires a few passes to go, but it does a very good job at smoothing that out and leaving only the amount of material that's needed behind. Some areas will require quite a bit of the putty. Other areas won't really require much, just enough to seal it up. Putty work is well underway. I've done several rounds of putty where the pylons join the secondary hull. I've done some scribing lines because these lines here are to be continuous all the way through. It's supposed to look like it's all one part, and that's going to need some work probably once I get the gray primer on that will reveal every single blemish. I've started working on the pylon to nacelle joints. I've just got this one side done here, and there's more work that needs to be done on the ends of the pylon nacelle joints here. You can see that the deflector dish putty is well underway. Again, that's going to need some cleanup, and that's going to be fun masking the dish off so that it doesn't damage the paintwork on there. There might need to be some paint touch-up, but that is a custom mixed color, which will be challenging to match. It's okay if it doesn't quite match perfectly, because then there will be a little bit of shading. So if I can't quite get to match properly, I will err on the side of darker on that section. The neck work has been started, and the remaining putty work on the neck joint to the saucer has been started. But again, there are some areas where this is going to be sanded down and smoothed out, and it's really hard to see with the clear translucent material. So it will really show once the gray primer is on where work needs to be done. Now, I've also done the full saucer edge, as you saw previously, and so putty work is well underway. This seam is definitely going to need some work. If you do your putty seam work first and then do your primer coats, then once the project is assembled, you're going to have an easier time with those light leaks because really they're going to take care of themselves. What I'm going to do right now is start working on the masks that I need for the lower saucer windows. So I'm kind of juggling a couple different things here at the moment. While I am in between putty jobs, I'm going to start doing some of the computer work. Well, actually, first I'm going to check to see how the windows fit from the Aztec dummy masking set, but Lou tended to go a little oversized so he could push them down in and it would mask the edges, the inside edges of the windows. I want them to sit down flush, so I'm tending to want them to be a little bit smaller, which is just personal preference. So I'm probably going to do some computer work today and see if I can get those to fit properly. This is probably going to need to have a coat of adhesion promoter on it before those masks will stick in the windows, but we will see how that goes. So in an effort to make sure that I have enough masks to do all of the windows, since the Aztec dummy mask set doesn't provide enough to be able to remask several times throughout the process, I've pulled out my Cameo 4 and I've taken appropriate measurements, did a few test prints to get them the right size, and I am now printing out my own masks for the windows. Currently, these are for the main windows, the long windows on the lower saucer section. Now, the issue with a non-commercial vinyl printer, so just a standard consumer version, is that they don't print such narrow windows perfectly every time, and so I'm printing many more than I need, and I am just going to pick the ones that have printed properly. I've been having fun with window masks. All of the ring of windows here are masked. If you're interested, there's about 360 windows here, and then there's all these dormer windows going on, the squares up here. There's a couple squares in the back, and these are all various different sizes of windows. So it's been interesting to measure them, cut them, test them, adjust them. You might be able to see here that there's slightly thicker windows here and slightly narrower windows here. The narrower ones are the ones I'm going with, and so that's just part of the test and retest process I'm going through. I've discovered a few things about cutting these windows that I will pass on to you. My first go was doing the rounded top and bottom windows right side by side, but that does not cut very well, and I was getting a lot of bad windows doing it that way. So I moved then to doing it this way, which was much more reliable. However, there still is a lot of waste, and it's interesting how like certain sections seem to create more waste than others. But the rounded windows, so rounded top and bottom, at this size, so as narrow as they are, you get a lot of bad prints. So this is why people generally don't want to cut and sell window masks for these kits, because there is an extremely high fail rate on the cut where they're just cut irregularly. So I went through and I just pick and chose out the ones that were the best. Now, if I go to rectangle windows, so square corner cut windows, top and bottom, I get 100% effectiveness on the cutter. And so these are the dormitory windows. I think these are the shorter ones here, and I'm getting 100% success rate on those. So if you're not looking to have them kind of the corners rounded off, you get a much more trustworthy, reliable cut on them. So curved corners produce wavy sides on these things. So I've gone through working on those, and I think I've got basically all of the windows on the bottom now taken care of. Now I will eventually need to replace all of these. That's why I am cutting them myself, and just instead of relying on the ones that are provided by the Aztec dummy mask kit, because as I put various different layers of paint on, I'm going to need to be able to pull these and replace them and have lots of copies. So nothing against the Aztec dummy masks for the windows. It's just that I'm going to need so many that I might as well start printing them myself from the start. Video editing, Andrew here. I just noticed that I missed a clip of this particular item. So here's a photograph I took to show that the masks that I had just put down on the ship were starting to peel when I put the adhesion promoter on. The issue here is that they are just a little bit too big for the recessed windows, so I had to scale them down just a little bit so that they would settle right inside the recessed window areas. All of the outer ring windows have been replaced. The windows have been resized to the proper size, and so no matter how I run my finger, I'm not catching them, I'm not pulling them up, and so that's going to be so much better. But now it's back to the seam work, and what I'm doing is working on the seam of the neck to the lower saucer, and this is just taking a good chunk of elbow grease to get this seam smoothed out, just from the roughness of the epoxy that was in there. Two things I want to show you here, focusing on the neck area. First is you can see that there's a whole bunch of putty down here, and I've got it fairly smoothed out, but there are just areas that are going to need to be worked on once the primer is on, because it's just so hard to see the little issues when it's clear, translucent material. The other thing I want to show you is the masking that I've started to do on the neck windows, and I do not concede defeat very often in model building when there's a way that I want to be able to do something. However, although my Cameo 4 is cutting these masks, they are so tiny and so fiddly to work with. You can see that I've got, what, 6 masks on there? I've got way more than that here on this little discard sheet. They just simply are not sticking, not settling down. I've resized them a couple of times. Nothing I do gets them to work well, simply because they are so incredibly tiny. So I'm probably going to have to just bite the bullet on this one and scrape these windows, and it's likely going to be the same thing on the back of the neck because they are tiny there too. I will evaluate that when I get to it. There are some bigger windows around here. I'll see if I can mask those up, but all these teeny tiny windows in here, I am simply going to have to bite the bullet and scrape those off. I do prefer the look of the windows if they've been masked, especially if you renew the masks after each coat, but again, these ones, they're going to have to be scraped. I've got the ship flipped over and I'm working on the top section. You can see over here that I've got some of the masks going down on the windows on the top saucer. Did some work to just get the size of those correct. I've also put down some adhesion promoter, which also helps the masks to stick to the fiberglass there. But I've also dealt with a problem over here where the saucer joins the neck. The whole neck saucer joint was a big issue on this kit, and you can see over here that there's actually quite a significant step where the saucer meets the neck. So that has to be dealt with. So I had to auger out some of the material inside, and there had been some hardened epoxy in there that was also preventing it. So I had to get my Dremel out and auger that out, make sure that I avoided any of the wires for these navigation lights. And then I ended up using a vice grip to clamp down on this, because a standard clamp just wouldn't be strong enough to pinch this down. And it's actually very much in line with the neck now. And this does taper down a little bit, but you'll never notice that. It'll look a lot better like that than it will like this. You can see that all of the main window masks are on the upper section. We've also got some longer masks up here at the front. There's some additional window masks up in the bridge area. Some of them are really small. The really small ones will probably need to be scraped, but there are some on the edge here I should be able to get a mask on. And I'm just waiting for some adhesion to promoter to dry. because I hadn't done this area with the adhesion promoter, and it really does help those masks stick down. I've also given an extra spray of adhesion promoter to the phaser array. I'm going to need to mask that off as well for painting, because we want as little paint on the phaser array as possible so that that nice phaser effect with the lighting shows up really well. And I'm thinking I might try masking that off with liquid mask. Might just make my life a little easier. We'll see how precise I can get it. It doesn't have to be too precise. I just need the inside section, and there's a bit of a ridge here. You may not be able to see on camera, but there's a ridge, and as long as the inside of that ridge has no primer and light blocking, then that phaser effect should show up quite well. And you'll see that the vice grip is back on. That did not hold. So what I've done is I put epoxy back in, the vice grip's back on, but there was a little bit of a gap right about here where the saucer meets the neck, and I laid a little bit of epoxy down in there. So it'll mean a little bit of sanding cleanup, but it should hold. And I'm not moving on to the other side until I know that this is taken care of properly, because I don't want to be playing around with both sides at the same time and mess up anything, since it's a little bit of trial and error on that. So I'm going to be working on phaser array masking and all the masking up around the bridge that I can do. Again, some of it may need to be scraped. I just want to eliminate as much scraping as possible, because I am going to have scraping to do all along the sides, the small windows on the neck, a lot of areas. So the more I can mask, the better it will be. More window masks are down. Just a couple to highlight. This back here was really fun. That's the Arboretum windows. I'll try to get you a better picture of that on screen so you can see those. I've also done all the tiny masks up by the bridge, and you can see that there are some that are blue. That's because that is the 3M blue painter's tape cut precisely. The ones on those kind of curved surfaces just needed to be done with the tape. The vinyl just simply was not sticking. Combination of it being the curve and the type of material that this is on, even though it's been sprayed with the adhesion promoter, it is a tricky surface to get those vinyl masks onto. Now, I've also masked off the phaser array with a liquid mask. I'm not the biggest proponent of liquid mask all the time, but there are very good uses for it, and the phaser array here has a edge on it that prevents the liquid mask from flowing out. So it kind of creates a bit of a trough, even though it's a raised detail, but it really does contain that liquid mask very well. So that was a good option for the phaser array. I'm also looking at these edge windows here. That's going to be very difficult to see on camera because of the translucent material, but I know that the vinyl masks will not catch this edge very well or at all, but I may try to see if the 3M blue will work on that edge, because if I can mask that off before I put the primer down, that's going to be probably better. And also these navigation lights, I've used the liquid mask on those to mask off the navigation lights before the primer goes. Talking about the primer, I may prime this in stages just to make it a wee bit more manageable. So I might do the top saucer, and then I might flip it over and do the bottom saucer, and then I might work my way to the back of the ship. Also, vice grip on this side. I had to redo the side over here. It seems to be holding, so I've got the epoxy in here. I just drilled it out a little bit, got this clamp down so that it molds better with the neck. This neck seam is never going to be perfect on this kit, just the nature of a garage kit, but the goal is to get it to look as good as possible. I've messed around a bit with these outer windows, trying to see if I can get some masks on them, but because of the curvature and the type of material, masks are simply not going to work on this. These are going to have to be scraped, much like the windows on the neck. But you'll see that this has all been kind of blocked off In order for me to be able to see what I'm doing on the rest of the refinement work, I need to get some primer down. So, since all of the masks are on and I can see that there's a couple I just need to replace that are not quite sitting properly, I'll do that before I spray down anything. But in order to see what I'm doing, I need to get some primer down, and so that is what I am going to do next. First, very light coat of grape primer has gone onto just the saucer section, and it is a very light coat. You can see lots of places where you can still see the bare resin underneath. That's intentional. This coat is simply intended to reveal to me where all of the issues are. For example, there is a gouge in the material right here that's going to need to be filled and sanded. It really reveals how much work needs to be done on the neck, or how good it is so far. And so that's just going to reveal what I need to do on it. There's a bit of a issue here that needs to be filled, and just some spots around, but when it's a translucent or clear material, you can't really see it all that well. So this is going to show up everything, and it's just a very, very light coat to reveal all that detail. The next thing I will do is flip it over, do the masking on the phaser array, and repeat the process that I've done on the top. But that's going to have to happen in the next update. And that's going to be it for this update on the 1000 scale Enterprise D project. Not the flashiest of updates, not the glory shots for you to be able to see, but it is very important work we've gotten done in this update, and it's going to show in the final product, in how well everything looks when it is done. So very, very important steps. Take your time with your putty work, take your time with your masking, all that kind of stuff. It will pay off at the end. In the next update, hopefully we'll get to the point where the whole thing has that first coat of primer on it, and we're able to get all the rest of the refinement work done. We'll have to see how that turns out. It's a very cold and rainy day here as we are preparing to move into the winter season. I am bundling up. I had the shop doors open while I was spraying today, and it was just so cold, and it's just that season. So I'd like to get all that smelly primer work done and get into the acrylics, which are not as bad in this air. So if you enjoyed this update, please make sure that you hit that like button if you're new to my channel, or you haven't done so yet. Why not hit that subscribe button today? You'll make me very happy if you do. But for now, my name is Andrew, and this is Canadian Starships. Have a great day, everyone.